Welcome to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series, brought to you by Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. My name is Steve Damaris, and I'm the Taylor Chair in Applied Big Game Research and Instruction at Mississippi State University. Thank you for joining me. Within Mississippi, we have a lot of regional variation in antler size. Between the delta I mentioned earlier is the Mississippi Alluvial Valley in red, and then the Loess Hills, and I mentioned earlier the thin loess. This is actually the thick and thin loess combined in blue, and then the gold-colored Lower Coastal Plain. I mentioned the Lower Coastal Plain being a lower quality, sandier soils. And we see the regional antler size. This is antler size based on Boone and Crockett score at maturity at 5.5 and older. That's the harvested bucks from our DMAP database, from the state agency's DMAP database. And you can see in the delta, the average mature buck is growing antlers that score on average 136. Within the Loess region, the mature bucks that are being harvested are growing antlers that produce about 130 inches, Boone and Crockett. And in the Lower Coastal Plain, in the gold color, you see mature bucks are producing antlers that are around 116 inches of antler size. There's roughly a 20-inch difference in Boone and Crockett score between the Lower Coastal Plain, the LCP bucks at maturity, compared to the Delta region bucks at maturity. A roughly 20-inch difference. Do you remember 20 inches and a figure earlier? Think about that crude protein study from Texas. At 4.5 years of age, those two groups of bucks differed by about 20 inches, and the diets they had been growing on differed by about 8% crude protein, the 8% versus 16%. So that 20% from that study matches very similarly to the 20-inch difference in this study. Now, landowners in Mississippi were concerned and questioned whether or not this regional variation was due to nutrition or genetics. And the state agency, they're very fine biologists, proposed that it was a nutritional variation. It had to do with the soil quality and the plant quality and the land uses in the Delta versus the Loess versus the Lower Coastal Plain. The Deer Lab, we also supported that explanation, that it was a nutritional difference, not genetics. This graph, this figure shows body size variation. Again, the same three regions and a huge variation in body size between the Delta, the Loess, and the Lower Coastal Plain. Again, landowners asked, well, is this nutrition or genetics? And they were concerned that they had lower quality genetics in these other regions. Informed wildlife biologists, deer biologists said no, it is a nutritional difference that drives this morphological variation between the regions. But sometimes landowners need to have things proven to them, and we needed to prove it too. We believed we knew that it was related to nutrition, but there are different subspecies of whitetails in much of Mississippi compared to the Lower Coastal Plain region, and we wanted to show that there is no genetic limitation. So we wanted to study this. We brought deer in from each of those three regions. We brought bred does from the wild that then produced fawns in our research pens, and we raised these fawns on high quality diets for 2 generations to see if body and antler size would compensate and allow the bucks from the lower coastal plain and the Lurs region to grow as big a body and bigger of antler as the region, as those bucks from the Delta region. So let's look at the study results. In the first generation of bucks, and this is Boone and Crockett score on the left or vertical axis, and we have the Delta in red, the Lurs bucks in blue, and the lower coastal plain bucks in gold. And we see at 3 years of age, the Lurs bucks had produced antler size equal to the Delta, whereas the lower coastal plain bucks in the first generation from the lower coastal plain, they were still short about 13 inches. So they had not compensated, but they were getting closer after just one generation of improved nutrition. After the 2 generations of bucks, so the first generation deer were raised on optimum nutrition, and we saw partial compensation in antler size. Those first generation deer were bred within region. So bucks from the lower coastal plain bred does from the lower coastal plain that had also been raised on optimum nutrition. And they produced a second generation. And so after 2 generations of optimum nutrition, we see that the second generation lower coastal plain bucks are fully compensated. They are growing antlers just as big as the Delta deer. Pretty amazing. We proved that genetics was not limiting antler size in deer in the lower coastal plain or in the Lurs, even though the wild harvested bucks dramatically differed in their antler size. Let's look at generational improvement from nutritional improvement in body weight. In the first generation, we see that body weights went up in the Delta from the wild deer into the first generation, and into the second generation, there was an 18-pound increase in body weights of Delta deer in this study compared to the wild deer. And the Delta deer in Mississippi, they're our gold standard in as far as deer are concerned, and yet providing optimum nutrition in our research pens, they actually significantly increased body weights over 2 generations. So one of the take-home points to our study is, my goodness, how big could Delta bucks grow if they had the best nutrition? If the habitat quality was optimum in the Delta, think about how big they could grow. And looking at our lower coastal plain, this generational improvement, the wild harvested bucks in the lower coastal plain compared to wild harvested bucks in the Delta, we showed that after 1 generation of good nutrition, they bumped up 12 pounds. In the second generation, they bumped up another 35 pounds for a total of 47-pound increase over 2 generations. And those bucks are now growing bodies as big as the Delta deer. That's what you call generational improvement in body size, and as in the previous figure showed, antler size. The difference in regional body and antler size variation in Mississippi is due to nutrition, not genetics. So the story comes down to what your mother told you when you were when you were growing. You are what you eat. If all you eat are potato chips and candy, you're going to turn into a potato chip. So what your deer grow into as adults is a function of what they ate when they were born and what their mothers ate before they were born, and in fact, what their grandmothers ate before their mothers were born. So nutrition matters. The effects can last a lifetime and beyond, and it takes multiple generations of improved nutrition before you see significant impacts on the bucks that you're trying to produce big antlers on. 2 generations minimal investment in a significant habitat improvement program before you can expect to see really significant improvement in body mass and antler size. You'll see some after 1 generation, but you're not going to see much after just 1 year. You need a generation and 2 generations of deer being raised on those improved habitat conditions.